It is February 8th, 2019. This is Seaside Chats with Kenneth Arthur. I've been saying February my whole life, but for some reason today it just feels weird. Trying to get that R in there. Hey, just like Brian Schottenheimer trying to get that R in there, that run that is. Am I right, guys? Run versus pass. It's a debate that people like to talk about, and I don't anymore. But I will talk about it anyway, and that's some of the things that we will be talking about today on Seaside Chats with Kenneth Arthur, where I'm going to be taking your questions from Twitter about you guessed it, the Seattle Seahawks. That's what we do every week here on Seaside Chats. Well, not the mailbag part. Almost every week I have a guest, someone like Danny Kelly or Mina Kimes or one of our great writers here at Field Goals, and we talk about the Seahawks. It's the offseason now, NFL Combine coming up. That's probably the next big important thing, and that comes up at February 26th, I think. I felt more comfortable saying February there, but it's a slow season. Sometimes that does happen, even for the NFL. It's a year-round league, and lots of interesting stuff happens all the time. But we got the Combine at the end of February, then you got March 13th is the opening officially of free agency. Things can happen before then. The Seattle Seahawks will need to tag Frank Clark if that's one of the things to take care of for them, and I believe it will be. But right now, February 8th, it's just flowing. Now that word is just flowing out. Seaside Chats with Kenneth Arthur is this show. This is a free episode of the podcast. If you'd like to support the show, you can go to patreon.com/fieldgoals. For an opportunity to support this show and to get every episode at $2 a month. The support level, you can get every episode of Seaside Chats, all the past episodes, all the upcoming episodes, putting it out at least once a week, and things will get heavier as the draft approaches. There'll be a lot more interest, I know for sure, in what's going on with the Seahawks. They have the 21st overall pick, their highest pick, well, I guess since last year when they were 18th and then traded down to 27, but and a likely thing that they'll do. But there'll be a lot more draft coverage coming up, of course. Combine preview. We're going to get in some excellent guests to talk about those sorts of things, and it'll be nice times ahead. $2 a month. You also be eligible for some free prizes, some cool prizes. We got Shaquem Griffin bobbleheads. We have a cool blueprint of CenturyLink Field. We've got these foot bottles, and these foot bottles are my favorite toy of, and it's not really a toy. It's it's really for the adults out there. I mean, you can put juice in there, of course, but a foot bottle, it's what it sounds like. It's about a Nerf-sized football, a little bit bigger than a Nerf actually, but it's a football. You can throw it. It definitely works, and there's a bottle inside of it, and then you can hide your liquids in there or keep them in there, or you can put if you're the Da Vinci Code guy, Tom Hanks' character, whatever his name is, and you've got the secrets to King Tut's tomb or whatever that movies are about, those books, you can put the secrets into the foot bottle and then from one roof throw it to the other roof and get it away from that powder looking dude. So that's something that you can consider. If you're a Patreon supporter, some of these giveaways today, I'm giving away one of those foot bottles. You can go to footbottles.com. They're $25 a piece. It's a really cool item. I like it a lot. But if you email me at sbnfieldgoals@gmail.com and tell me who your off season, your biggest priority in the off season is, whether it's re-signing a Seahawk or an outside free agent, just email me any answer. It can be real, it can be a joke, it can be a blank email, I guess, and I'll enter you guys into a contest to win one of these foot bottles, be sent right to your place. It's a great little toy, completely free. And just email me. If you're a Patreon supporter, I'll pick from, you have to be a Patreon supporter, but I'll pick from the Patreon supporters, and you'll get one of those foot bottles, and I'll announce that next week. So email me your biggest offseason priority, whether it's keeping one of the Seahawks own free agents or an outside free agent. There's a lot of nice names out there, ones that will never, ever, ever end up in Seattle. Jadeveon Clowney, and that's one that people talk about a lot. I think it's a little it's a lot overblown. Expensive guy who may not even be a fit and is perhaps not even that great of a pass rusher. So, he's a great run defender and maybe a nice, and maybe one of he could be one of the, but he's playing in a 3-4. Come on, guys. Come on. You don't want Jadeveon Clowney, $100 million, whatever he's going to get. Hey, he's still getting paid off of that first overall pick. Anywho, this week on Seaside Chats, I have no guest. My guest is you, the followers on Twitter. You can do that at twitter.com/fieldgoals. You can follow us there, but I have opened up the mailbag to take some questions. I've had this coffee in my hand for nigh on since the podcast started, and I just want to take a sip. But we took your questions, the royal we, and on Twitter. We're going to go through these and try and talk about some of the things that are on your mind right now, and hopefully that is quite satisfying. So let's just go through these. Again, if you want, you can sponsor the show at patreon.com/fieldgoals, $2 a month and up. For all you fine folks out there, this episode is free. And also, a thank you to our sponsor, Injury Legal Center. You can go to injurylegalcenter.net for, basically any legal need. It doesn't hurt to ask, but they work in a bunch of states. You can, they work on a contingency basis, so you don't pay them until this works out for you. So injurylegalcenter.net, our sponsor. Thank you very much. But let's get to some of your questions. The first one that pops up on my feed is from blank. That's at HDR. Let's say HD Robot, but the first O is a 0. One of our own here, a former Seahawks field goals writer. He asks, is the Seahawks offense better or worse next year? Does Shoddy pass more next year? And then in parentheses, in neutral situations. I think, is the Seahawks offense better or worse next year? What are the things that we know about the 2019 Seahawks offense, or at least the things that we can safely assume? We can safely assume that Russell Wilson is coming back, and that, we can always assume, we just assume health, right? So they have Russell Wilson. That's going to help them not be worse, right? I mean, if you have Russell Wilson, it's a good opportunity to say, we've got a top 5 quarterback. So I think that to get worse, it's relative, of course. But most of all, it's a really nice thing to not have that question. I'm trying to think maybe a team that does have that question. You could look at a team like the Pittsburgh Steelers, or even the New England Patriots, these teams that have maybe older quarterbacks, and hey, it could go downhill a little bit. The Seahawks were 9th in DVOA on offense, and that included a split that was 6th in passing and 7th in rushing. So they, had a pretty solid and balanced offense in that respect. So to get better, we know that they're capable of better with Russell Wilson and Pete Carroll. We know that they've been first in offensive DVOA, and I think that was 2015. They've been even better than this. Russell Wilson did break the franchise record for touchdown passes, and he did so on only 427 attempts. They did the type of offense that Pete Carroll wants to do, which again is running the ball more. And it is kind of interesting to try and ask, what is their ceiling at this point? We know that Chris Carson, would be back. Not as much of a picture of health as Russell Wilson, but he did start 14 games, was available for the playoffs, rushed for 1,151 yards. They want to get Rashad Penny more involved, I'm sure. And I think Rashad Penny is an option that potentially is, even better at running back. He might have that crazy high ceiling that a Marshawn Lynch does have. And it's an interesting proposition. And then, of course, so much of that depends on the play of the offensive line. We know that they're going to have Dwayne Brown at left tackle. They signed him to an extension before the year. And we can assume that they're going to have Justin Britt. Not a lot of savings if you move on from Justin Britt, but if they do decide to move on from Justin Britt, whether it's to get healthier or not healthier, but younger, whether it's to save a couple $1 million, which they would do, whether it's because they really like Joey Hunt, who started a game last year and seemed to do really well. At least the offense did well, I think, and well enough. And there wasn't like a clear drop off with Joey Hunt, or if it's Ethan Pochik and getting him in there. So they've got 2 options on the offensive line already. I think that they're are in fairly good position right now, especially at left tackle. But then they've got these question marks, right? Both of their starting guards, J.R. Sweezy and DJ Fluker, are free agents, signing for 1 year and $1.5 million each last season, and not knowing exactly who their guards will be next year. We can assume that Jermaine Ifedi will be the right tackle, but I think there has to be some sort of competition open. Jermaine Ifedi still, penalty problems, still problems just being good. And, now that was his third season last year. We know that a lot of offensive linemen, they do take this big spike up in their third year. It's not always across the board. I don't know that Ifedi did take a huge jump up last year. It could still happen. It's really hard to find good right tackles. There's 32 teams. There's 64 tackles in any given week. And out of those 64, it's the position itself is losing talent, I think, at younger and younger ages as players want to play defensive end. They see, bigger money, or they want to be defensive tackles, or, you get stats and you get sacks, and it's a little bit, maybe feels more of a rewarding position. Maybe even potentially a little safer, but I don't think that there's 64 good tackles in the NFL. In fact, I think there's maybe less than 32, maybe less than half of that. So any good tackles, for the most part, are going to play left tackle, and the right tackles, you're going to have a significant drop off. And if you don't see Jermaine Ifedi as being a guy who can eventually take over for Dwayne Brown, who's, in his mid 30s, if you don't see him that way, then you have to ask yourself, what is the long-term outlook here for Jermaine Ifedi, and do you want to pick up his fifth-year option? And that's going to be a question that they face this year, and it's one that I think, like, you could make arguments either way, but it would be paying him, I think, something like $10 million in 2020, and that's for, honestly, a right tackle, and probably not even a great right tackle or a good right tackle. It's a risky one, because either way, if in one case, if you give him the fifth-year option and he breaks out, then you've got this really nice value, which is a $10 million starting tackle. That's not that bad of a value, actually, and you have another year to wait on it. But if Jermaine Ifedi gets hurt, which we know is completely possible, and the offensive linemen, they just, like, it's a tough position. You take hits every play. Anything can happen. If he gets hurt, then that whole salary becomes guaranteed. And then all of a sudden you're stuck with that contract, and it's even harder to swallow. So a risky proposition to give Jermaine Ifedi the fifth-year option. I don't think Seattle will do it, but it's a question. It's probably less of a question of whether or not he'll be the starting right tackle next season, at least to open camp and see how that goes. George Fant is a restricted free agent. So probable that they could give him the original round tender, which he's undrafted. It means that the Seahawks would have the option to match a contract if he signed with another team, but if they didn't match it, they wouldn't get anything in return. And maybe that's just the best way to go. He was just a sixth offensive lineman last season. I know that the feeling around George Fant is, no, but he was good, but he wasn't playing right tackle. He was playing right tackle. He wasn't even playing tight end, really. I mean, he caught one pass, of course, and it's very fun and it's nice to talk about. And it was exciting, and everyone wanted it to happen because he's big. Yeah. But George Fant is going to be turning 27. He has never proven to be a starting offensive lineman. So again, I think it's just a question of how much better will they get on the offensive line. I think they need to do better than Sweezy and Fluker. I think that's something, we need to see, can Jordan Simmons, you can't rely on a Jordan Simmons because of his health, but it's something else that you want to bring him in. And I think he's an exclusive rights free agent, so he'll definitely be back. And, having Jordan Simmons in there, having some of the, getting back Jamarco Jones, the fifth-round pick from last year that everyone liked a lot, except for, we didn't have the best combine or whatever, but maybe this is the only guy that Mike Solari has really picked from the draft and from the younger players out there. So it's really whatever Mike Solari wants, and it could be a thing that Jamarco Jones brings. So, and that could slide Jermaine Ifedi maybe back inside to guard. And you got Jamarco Jones at right tackle. Do you have Jermaine Ifedi at right guard? Do you have Dwayne Brown and Justin Britt, those other positions? And then left guard, are you looking at someone like re-signing J.R. Sweezy, who may be cheaper than DJ Fluker? I don't really know what those guys are going to cost, but I don't know how teams will view DJ Fluker after this one season. in Seattle, where he got like some good press, and is considered, and I believe is a very good locker room presence, thought to be a very competitive guy who loves winning and loves football and all that kind of stuff, which is not true of everyone. And but he also got injured again, which he did with the Giants. And he also, I don't know that he was the best pass protecting offensive guard that Seattle could have had. So questions for the offensive line really put questions in my head about the offense being better next year. I think the potential is there. If they have nowhere to go but up. Maybe in some respect they have ways to go. So it's more likely that they would go up or stay neutral at the guard positions and tackle. So that's, to me, it's like that could be a good thing. Tight end, that we hope to see Will Disley come back, and he may indeed be a much more complete and well-rounded and exciting, and is definitely a younger tight end than Ed Dickson. And Ed Dickson is someone who maybe be on the fence in terms of whether or not they bring him back. Some savings if you release him. He only had 12 catches during the regular season. He played in 10 games. He's not a receiving threat. I know that people say he had chemistry with Russell Wilson, but it wasn't enough chemistry for him to get more than a target per game, really, just barely more than a target per game. He had his best game came in the playoffs. He may be a good blocking tight end, but I also heard that he maybe wasn't that good of a blocking tight end this past season. There's questions around Ed Dickson and questions around the tight end position. So they need to get better at tight end. And then you've got, if Doug Baldwin returns, he's going to be 31, and is he going to be healthy? Is his health going to be an ongoing issue? Or was that just, this past season? It hasn't been a thing that has plagued him throughout his career. So maybe there's a hope there. But if you have Doug Baldwin and Tyler Lockett, what is his trajectory? He had the highest passer rating, perfect passer rating to Tyler Lockett. He catches 57 of 70 targets for 965 yards, 10 touchdowns, 17 yards per catch. I mean, incredible numbers, but is Tyler Lockett and is this offense ever going to be an offense that provides Tyler Lockett with 100 targets, 120 targets, Can he be a 1,300-yard receiver? Is that something that's in their mind? Is that the best offense? Is it a high-volume offense? Is it the Kansas City Chiefs offense? Is that the best offense? Or is it an offense that maybe doesn't put up the biggest numbers and the biggest stats, but is the most efficient? And it does finish first in DVOA and does hit, make big explosive plays, even though they also run the ball a lot. It's a question that is worth asking. And, I think the best offense is the one that, obviously helps you win the games. That's what the best offense is. If you win your games 25-10, that'd be really good. But, offense can help defense. Defense can help offense. We know this. And so it's just a matter of what the Seahawks really aim to do. So will the offense be better or worse? In my opinion, there's so many things that still need to happen, but I think the fact that Brian Schottenheimer is going into his second year as offensive coordinator is a good thing. We saw Kyle Shanahan in Atlanta. His first year, it was so-so, and then his second year, Matt Ryan won MVP. I think that there is something to instilling the offense, getting the quarterback comfortable with the offensive coordinator. This is only the second coordinator that Wilson has ever had. I think there's something to the fact that, they're trying to work in Rashad Penny into his second season and figuring out the Carson Penny thing. I think there's something to Doug Baldwin being healthier next year. And there's something to Tyler Lockett, sort of changing his game a little bit and adjusting to this new offense. I think there's something to the upgrades that they could have at guard and tight end. I think there is reasons for optimism. So given the choice to either, answer the question or not answer the question or give an answer that's sort of wishy-washy, I'll say, the Seahawks offense will be better next year. They do have room to move up. They were 6th in points. They were only 18th in yards, which is whatever. I mean, it's not a good stat, but 6th in points, 15th in net yards per pass attempt, 5th in rush yards per carry. As I said before, 9th in DVOA. I think they do have room to move up. I think they'll be about a top 5 team in DVOA. I'm going to say yes. The Seahawks offense will be better next year. Thank you, blank. Moving on. Wang Nguyen at HHN111 said, who will the Seahawks sign to an extension first, Bobby Wagner or Russell Wilson? Well, I mean, I think that's a good question. I'm going to pull up just here at overthecap.com just to make sure that I'm fully 100% up on the deets for those guys. Both are indeed going into their last years of their contract. That's quite a predicament, not as a predicament, but quite interesting. Wilson and Wagner, of course, were both part of the 2012 draft class. Both going into their 8th season, both, as you say, becoming free agents. This year, Russell Wilson has a cap hit of $25 million. Bobby Wagner has a cap hit of $14 million. And I think one of the most important things to ask and to talk about is the fact that, Wagner is a linebacker and Wilson is a quarterback. So you know for sure that when you're Russell Wilson, you're the most important person to the Seattle Seahawks. More important, in probably the eyes of a lot of people, more important than Pete Carroll, more important than John Schneider, more important than Bobby Wagner. But they're both the most important people on their side of the football. They're both, I think, the top 2 reasons the Seahawks made the playoffs last year. They're both incredibly vital. But a lot of people also asking at this point now, the question is being floated out there: would the Seahawks trade Bobby Wagner and try and get value out of him, like in a quote unquote New England Patriots or Bill Belichick type way? I mean, look at Bobby Wagner. The guy is 28 years old. He turns 29 in June. He's made the Pro Bowl in each of the last 5 years. He's been a first-team All-Pro in 4 of the last 5 years. He is arguably the best defensive player in the NFL outside of Aaron Donald. I don't know that that's actually true, but you could argue it. I don't think you could argue anyone other than Aaron Donald. I think Aaron Donald is maybe the best defensive football player in the NFL since Lawrence Taylor. So it's just, that's the bar for Aaron Donald. But Bobby Wagner is up there. And, 29, it's a question. It's a question of whether or not that's it. But the Seahawks really started doing their thing in 2012, and that's when Wilson came in, but it's also when Wagner came in, and that can't be, I wouldn't overlook that, his effect on the defense. The fact that the defense, without Earl Thomas this year and without so many other players that they had for the last 5-6 years, Richard Sherman, Earl Thomas, Cam Chancellor, Cliff Averill, Michael Bennett, I mean, all that kind of stuff, and Bobby Wagner was the mainstay. And the Seahawks defense is not great, but it was average. It was 14th in DVOA, 13th in pass defense, 17th in rush defense. And certainly if it was stopped from being bad, it was because of Bobby Wagner. How many other really good players can you name on the Seahawks defense? I mean, there were no other Pro Bowlers on the defense. There was nothing maybe even that close. I mean, Jaron Reed and Frank Clark, very good. Okay. I'll give you that. Jaron Reed and Frank Clark. Then you got Bradley McDougald, who I think is really good, but maybe a little overhyped for us because we just are desperate for something even close to resembling a Legion of Boom type defensive back. We like the potential in Trey Flowers. Maybe you still like the potential in Shaquille Griffin. You like what Justin Coleman is for a nickel corner, but this team is lacking defensive stars by a long shot, and it's something that is held together mostly by Bobby Wagner. If you trade Bobby Wagner, if you get rid of Bobby Wagner, if you take away that guy in the middle who's just everywhere, all over the field, 138 tackles, an interception, 2 forced fumbles, 11 passes deflected. That's the most on the defense this year for the Seahawks. 2 forced fumbles, 6 tackles for loss, 8 QB hits. I mean, Bobby Wagner is phenomenal. It's possible that at 29, 30 years old, he starts to slow down. And then it's, and then it's a question, what do you pay for that? What does a linebacker cost? Right now, inside linebacker contracts, number 1, Luke Kuechly, $12.3 million a year. Number 2, Bobby Wagner, $10.7 million a year. As I said, $14 million this upcoming year is last of his contract. And what would the next deal look like? I mean, if Bobby Wagner hit the open market, I think for sure, a team would pay him upwards of $13 million per year. I don't think that a team, out of 32 teams in there and lots of cap room for a lot of teams and teams that are desperate to have a leader and a guy in the middle and an experienced veteran who's not too old in the middle of their defense. And they look at Wagner and say, I could see 8 more years out of this guy. They might give him a deal for $13 million more for 5 years or whatever. That's really expensive, and it's expensive for a team like the Seahawks who are trying to figure out what they're going to do. They released Richard Sherman. They traded Michael Bennett. They're not too afraid of moving on from stars, but Bobby Wagner on another level. Most likely they're losing Earl Thomas. You really start to take away a big piece of what the Seahawks have been, their defense and those two guys and everyone else. It's a risky proposition. If you think if I told you during this season, Bobby Wagner's out this week, which he was one time, that feels really hopeless. That feels like a really hopeless position for the Seahawks to be in. When he's out, like, it's just not close to the same. And so they can go, and it's just the thing. Maybe they just go this 1 year and then franchise tag him next year, or which, isn't crazy, or, see what the extension sounds like. But it's a really difficult position that they could be in with Bobby Wagner right now. They might feel like they've made mistakes with Marshawn Lynch and Cam Chancellor, giving them extensions when they did, and then not getting anything out of it, and thinking that there's no way that this could be a negative outcome, and it was. And that's a position that they're in with Bobby Wagner, perhaps. But so I'd say that's maybe even being in that position makes them hesitate. So to answer your question, I think Russell Wilson gets the extension first, and maybe he's the only one to get the extension. And if you go to fieldgoals.com today, depending when you read this, I think the Seahawks drafting a quarterback this year, even in the first round, someone like Kyler Murray, who, has some legitimate comparisons to be made to Russell Wilson. I don't know, that there's at some point an NFL team. I'm not saying it's going to be the Seahawks. I'm not saying it's going to be Russell Wilson. I'm not saying that at all. But at some point in the NFL, given what we know about rookie contracts for quarterbacks now, given what we've seen in the CBA since 2011, given all that, a team with a star quarterback who has years left is going to move on from that quarterback. They'll trade him. They'll let him walk. The Washington and Kirk Cousins, they couldn't come to a deal. Of course, then they added Alex Smith and signed him to a deal, which is kind of insane. And Washington's a bad organization. But at some point, a team will move on from a star quarterback and go with a rookie or whatever. They just will. I mean, it's going to happen because we've saw all these teams in the last 5 years make the playoffs, win the Super Bowl, get to the Super Bowl with rookie contract quarterbacks. And with Russell Wilson going into this next negotiating period, February, we don't know what to expect. Is he going to want $30 million a year, $32 million a year, $35 million a year? Is that too much? How much better would the Seahawks be if they did, draft a quarterback and had him for $8 million for total for 4 years, or $10 million over 4 years, or whatever, $7 million over 4 years? You're talking about saving $25+ million in those years. Money that can be used on Bobby Wagner, money that can be used on, keeping some of your own players who are getting old, like Jaron Reed and Frank Clark. Giving that type of financial freedom. So I don't know. It'd be interesting if Kyler Murray was someone that was available to them in the first round. Why not talk about it? And I'm not saying that the Seahawks will be the team to do it, but some team's going to do it. Some team's going to move on from a quarterback and say, I can't believe it. It doesn't happen in the NFL. The way that the NFL has been for their history, you got a franchise quarterback. That's your franchise quarterback. You don't lose him. You never do until his time is done. The Colts didn't move on from Peyton Manning until he had missed a whole season with an injury, and they had the #1 pick, and Andrew Luck was on the board. That's what it took for Peyton Manning to leave the Colts. Drew Brees is the most unique situation, but it took for him to have a really questionable shoulder injury that has never, ever, ever popped up since. And Phillip Rivers in the fold. Like, it takes so much. And that's the thing. If the Seahawks move on from Russell Wilson, maybe it would be a thing where they do have Kyler Murray, where they do have a quarterback in there that they have really a lot of confidence in. But I think teams will be setting up to try and avoid those $35 million quarterbacks, and someone's going to do it. But either way, I do believe the Seahawks will sign Russell Wilson to an extension. That's more likely than not. Bobby Wagner, a bigger question. So I would say Russell Wilson before Bobby Wagner. These answers got to be shorter. So moving on, run on every down at unintended max. Has a Seahawks defensive coordinator ever been aware that the quarterback sneak is a play that teams run on 4th and 1 or less? Well, unintended max, I don't know. I think that probably they have been. I think probably defensive coordinators know a lot more than me or you. So I'm sure that they're aware. A quarterback sneak on 4th and 1 or less is extremely difficult to stop. I don't have the numbers in front of me, but it's if you're 4th and inch, there's a reason that teams run it. It's really hard to stop. If you want to stop, I've also seen the Seahawks for most of the last 7 years. The defenses they had just consistently stop teams at the goal line on 4th and 1, 3rd and 1. It doesn't feel as good as it used to because the talent isn't as good as it used to be. It doesn't matter if you know what they're going to run or not. If you don't have the talent up front to stop it, if you don't have the talent in the secondary to stop them on 3rd and 8 on a pass, whatever it is, whatever the situation, if you're in 4th and 1, like if whatever the situation is, the Seahawks just need better players. I don't care who the defensive coordinator is. It's not Ken Norton. I don't think it's Ken Norton is the problem of why the Seahawks became an average defense. They lost Richard Sherman, Cliff Averill, Michael Bennett, Earl Thomas, Cam Chancellor, KJ Wright for most of the season. The Seahawks players were not as good. They need better defensive players. That's where they're going to get better. Is not in play calling and not in, it's going to be in getting better players. And they need those at some pretty key positions. I'll point out they need a better free safety than Tedrick Thompson. They need a better, they just need better cornerback play from Griffin and Flowers, which could just happen from the fact that they're both 23 years old. They need, they just need to have consistent outside linebacker play, which didn't happen because of injuries and suspensions with KJ Wright and Michael Kendricks, both of whom are free agents. They need a better pass rusher by far than Quentin Jefferson at defensive end. Maybe Rasheem Green will mold himself into that. They need to see like a full season type of performance from someone like Poona Ford at the other defensive tackle position. This 2013 defense that was incredible. Their defense was stacked at every position. The depth was insane. Guys on the bench should have been starting elsewhere, and then eventually they did. Guys who were starting, some of them Hall of Famers, some of them Pro Bowlers, in and out. It's just they need better players, so that's really what the focus should be here. Seahawks 12. I'm seeing 2 questions from you, and I'll see. Maybe we'll just choose one for now. I think you say at Metropolis Indu 1, how can the Seahawks make it right with Earl? Obviously, he is going to play for another team. What scenario can he be traded for, draft, or other players? How probable would that be? I think I've seen a few of this. Another one here, Paul, at laying smackdown. Do you think they will trade Earl Thomas this offseason? What could they get in return? There are several people who have asked this. The Seahawks will not trade Earl Thomas. Earl Thomas is a free agent. There you go. The Seahawks can't trade Earl Thomas. I need to say, well, what if they franchise tag him? I don't think the plan here is let's give Earl Thomas the franchise tag so that we can get into a dispute with him and trade him when, there's this whole Le'Veon Bell situation that just happened. And teams will know that there's no chance of Earl Thomas signing. There's no leverage. And there's just no way to do that. So I don't see it in any possible scenario where they would trade Earl Thomas. So the return is moot. What can they do to make it right with Earl Thomas, though? That's another question. And who knows where they stand today. Earl Thomas was mad in September or whatever. And I'm sure it's something that he hasn't forgotten. And, he said the disrespect has been noted and it won't be forgotten. So there you go. But all that stuff goes out the window if the team, if the scenario in front of you is the most beneficial to you. If Earl Thomas at his current state, he's 31 years old or 30 years old. He's only ever played for the Seattle Seahawks. He's only ever played for Pete Carroll. Maybe that's wearing on him. And maybe it's wearing on Carroll, given, the situation that he's had with other players and the so forth with Earl Thomas and the holdout. But I think that the thing is, if he looks at it right now and says, because I've broken my leg in 2 of the last 3 years, because this is the only place I've ever been successful, I might go out there in the market. And I think Earl Thomas will definitely, shop around. And he probably with the intention to not return to Seattle. But if he looks around and says, well, no team is offering me more than 1 year, or this team's offering me 2 years, but it's all incentives. Richard Sherman went out and he didn't get a very good contract for a Richard Sherman type player. Of course, he was negotiating on his own. But I think Earl Thomas might go out on the market and be like, none of these deals are that great. And I thought it was going to be different. And then look at Seattle and go, well, this is the only place I've been successful. And I can sign a 1-year deal here. And they would give me an opportunity to, be better and to solidify myself as a worthy player so that when I become a free agent in 2020 and, they're doing another CBA in 2020, I just think Earl Thomas might sign a 1-year deal. And the best place for him to sign a 1-year deal might be the Seahawks, because it's the only place that he's really been successful. He goes and it's a risk to go play for someone who doesn't know you and who might try to change you, might ask you to do different things and think that you can do the things for them. I mean, how many guys do we see leave a team via free agency and then return to that team 1 or 2 years later because they just weren't as good in that other place? I think it happens all the time. It's something I've noticed for ever. Michael, there's the names that pop up. Michael Johnson of the Bengals, he was successful there as a defensive end. He went and played 1 year somewhere else like the Bucks, wasn't good, and came back to the Bengals and he was good again. It didn't really happen with Byron Maxwell, but that was a guy who I expected to come back, and eventually he did. It wasn't quite the same scenario, but he wasn't as good for the Eagles and the Dolphins. And then he did return. I just expect guys to sort of do that sometimes. And I think Earl Thomas's best shot, if he has a 1-year deal, is to play for the Seahawks. Perhaps. I don't know that the Cowboys have money to sign Earl Thomas, even if it is not that big of a contract or a 1-year deal or whatever it is. I don't know that the Rams have enough money to sign Earl Thomas. There's just going to be questions about who wants Earl. We know the safety market is weird. There's going to be other maybe more attractive safeties out there for the Seahawks too. Maybe, Tyrann Mathieu. I had another in my mind that I can't quite grasp right now, but it's not a bad market out there. Landon Collins is the other one for the New York Giants. There's others too, but I don't know that Earl Thomas is going to find a lot out there, and maybe he does return, and all that other stuff is just nonsense. I don't care if he gives you the finger in the heat of just breaking his leg. I don't care if he holds out. I don't care about that kind of stuff. If you think that you hate players who hold out, tell me why you hate Walter Jones. He held out every single year, never showed up to training camp. If you hate guys, why do you got over Cam Chancellor, you'll get over Earl Thomas. So that's my opinion on Earl. Alex Jensen at Idaho Coach, what pieces could you see Seattle move to gain more draft capital? As far as players go, I don't see any. They just don't have any. Nothing, maybe a 7th round pick or something like that. You never know. But you look at the roster, they're not going to get something for Justin Britt. They're not going to get something they're not going to trade someone like David Moore and they wouldn't get anything there. It's not, I don't know. It's, I'm looking just quickly to see if there's anything. And I just know that I've thought about this before, and I don't think they have any pieces that they would trade that if anything that has value, they wouldn't trade it. They need to get better. And anything that they can part ways with just doesn't have that much value. I don't think that someone's giving up anything for, Justin Britt, a $10 million center who's maybe not that great, not at that level. Dan at my fan Y365. What's the largest animal Dwayne Brown could cling form to a lamppost? Same for Tyler Lockett. I'm assuming cling film is taking saran wrap and wrapping it around. Yeah, it's got to be what that is. The largest animal Dwayne Brown could do it for. I'm about the size of Dwayne Brown, though I'm not. But he's got 100 more pounds of muscle, and I've got 100 more pounds of flub, which is what I've got on my body. I'm trying to think of the largest animal I could cling form. Obviously, we're talking about something that's going to squirm. Probably any animal. I mean, a fish is going to squirm. A dog or a big cat's going to squirm. And I'm thinking If we're talking about like a tiger, then are we removing the claws and the teeth? Because I don't know, are we just talking about weight? We was telling you, so what's the largest animal? But I would say, probably a good deer, maybe something like that. But don't do that. We love our deer and we love our big cats. So don't do that. And Tyler Lockett, I'm just going to say again, don't do that. Maybe a marmot. I don't know what that is. And moving on, Hound Dog Harrison at Hound Dog Harrison. I like these simple Twitter handles that just match up your Twitter name. It's great. Then we're all on the same page. Any chance Amara Darboh would potentially have a shot of making the team, or have they moved on from him? Well, of course, there's I'd say a chance. Hound Dog, they still have him on the team. After the season, Pete Carroll noted Amara Darboh as a guy that he expects to contribute, they have a real shot at being on this team. So of course, there's, what do they really have at receiver? They've got Tyler Lockett and Doug Baldwin, and Doug Baldwin is, like I said, going to be 31. David Moore, is young, and there's no reason to not bring back David Moore and put him in the competition. But I think we saw him sort of just have a nice little peak and then just really fall off the map, and that's because he's maybe not a very complete player, and I don't know what the questions are about whether if it's an effort thing or anything along those lines. I don't want to put out into the ether that he's a low effort guy, but I'm just looking at someone like Amar, and Jaron Brown, I think gets released, and then they've got Malik Turner, and I think they'll bring in guys, and that's great. But Amar Darboh, it's very possible that Amar Darboh had a rookie season that a lot of receivers have, which is just like forgettable and isn't ready. And then his second year, he didn't make the team, of course, but then he was injured, and maybe he was dealing with something for a long time. And it's very possible that Amara Darboh does have a future in the NFL as a receiver, and could be a guy that is a number 3 or number 4 guy. But so there's a chance. Why not? He's on the team. He is someone that they're gonna give an opportunity to. Misfit 74 at M Misfit. Who are some edge trade targets for the team? Surely there are some guys on the market flying under the radar. Also, a deeper dive on names to watch in free agency, not mentioned in the recent article by Alistair Corp. I'm not sure about the trade targets, just because, it's, I just don't have that. That's something I can prepare over the course of a few days and writing an article, that kind of thing. But I don't have anything like that prepared. I will say this about the edge players, though. This would not necessarily be, I think that the trade market for edge players would be lower than most years, because there's so many guys available in free agency, and this is the best. They're saying that this could be the best defensive line class ever. They could break the record for most defensive players, most defensive linemen taken in the first round. There's just so much out there, and then in addition to that, just looking at the free agents that we already have: DeMarcus Lawrence, Davian Clowney, Frank Clark, D Ford, Preston Smith, Trey Flowers, Zadarius Smith, Ezekiel Ansah, Brandon Graham, Shane Ray, Clay Matthews, Dante Fowler, Shaq Barrett, Derek Morgan, Marcus Golden, Terrell Suggs, Cameron Wake. Benson Mayoa, Deion Jordan, Aaron Lynch, William Hayes, Alex Okafor, Bruce Irvin, Arnold McPhee. There's quality players and great players, good players, quality players, guys that could, contribute, and you're not even looking at it. There's a couple of years, the way that Julius Peppers, was sort of written off and then he contributed, the way that Chris Long was written off and then he contributed. Like, there's just so much depth out there. The draft is loaded. The free agency is loaded. I've been talking a lot about Ziggy Ansah as an option if he's sort of coming off of this injury and not really contributing much in to the last 3 years. If they could just sort of look at a guy like that and say, would you like to play for us for 1 year and $6 million or $8 million and maybe try and build yourself up again, and you'll play opposite of Frank Clark and you'll play on a line with Jaron Reed, and you'll be in a good position on a good team, a playoff team, and maybe give an opportunity like that to a guy. And then I don't know exactly how teams are going to be feeling about Dante Fowler. but I think, he seemed to play better for the Rams than he had ever played for the Jaguars. Maybe he wasn't as buried as when he was on the Jaguars, and you would have hoped that helped Dante Fowler become a better player. But, when he was with the Rams, he played in 8 games, 21 tackles, 2 sacks, 5 QB hits, 4 tackles for a loss. Not too bad. And if he's only 24 years old, turned 25 in August, and maybe that's a guy who says like, yeah, I'll sign a 2-year deal, try and get better, 1-year deal, try and prove something, 3-year deal, whatever it is. So I might look at a guy like Dante Fowler. And there's just a lot of names out there. So trade targets become sort of not even a secondary thought, maybe a third thought. And it's just going to be a question, because anyone that you do trade for, like, I don't know what edge players, like what type of edge player gets traded at this point. I mean, it's either going to be a guy who's too expensive. It's going to be a guy who's too old. It's going to be a guy who's too inconsistent. It's going to be a guy that wasn't liked by that team. I mean, your edge, you got quarterback, and then maybe number 2 is pass rush in this league. If you've got a guy on your team who you consider valuable at pass rush, why are you trading him? There would have to be really big questions as to why. We saw Dante Fowler get traded because he was the 3rd overall pick and not playing that well, and had never really played that well, and was gotten, kicked down the depth chart by guys that were drafted later than him by the Jaguars, like Yannick Ngakoue, and just guys that they liked a lot more. And anybody that you're trading, it's like, yeah, well, we trade him and we'll see what happens. The Seahawks traded for Clinton McDonald, and that was a nice deal for them. And they traded for Chris Clemens, and that was a good deal for them. And not saying that it doesn't happen, but you have to ask yourself why. And then also just like, it's probably when it does happen, you're not going to be necessarily that excited by it. You'll be like, oh, okay, well, there's another guy. That's just my thoughts. That's what I call this podcast, just my thoughts, because it's just me. Moving on to another one. I lost the questions. But Daryl Heim 2K says Eagles and Pats have successfully used trades the last 2 years to build roster. JSPC not afraid to trade. None of us would have expected them to trade Unger, who is on the current roster that could potential trade bait. Penny. I already addressed the trade thing. I don't think that Rashad Penny is trade bait. Moving on. At 12th Monkey, regular commenter on field goals for sure. And a good guy. Based on the draft class / free agency / cap space, do you think there's any chance Seahawks deal Wagner for draft picks, as some have speculated? Dealt with that earlier. As far as what the Seahawks could get for a Bobby Wagner trade, I don't know. Things like that don't really happen so often that you could even have a barometer. If I was the Seahawks, I probably would be not. I mean, if it was me, I wouldn't trade Bobby Wagner. I'm definitely not for less than a 1st-round pick. And then even then, I'm like, I need more than a 1st-round pick. I'm really looking at it, and I'm just, I don't know. You understand, like, if you trade, like, let's say the Oakland Raiders wanted to trade their, like, Bears 1st-round pick for Wagner, or it's like pick 24, pick 27, something like that, for Bobby Wagner. Like, do you really think that? I don't really think that the player that you're going to get at 24 or 27 is going to play like Bobby Wagner. And there's a money savings involved, or asking yourself, what's the long term here? Is it a net positive for my team? But it's really difficult for me. I just don't really. If the draft pick's not in the top 10, top 12, like, I don't think that's where. I don't think that you're getting good value for Bobby Wagner. When the Bucks traded for Darrelle Revis, they sent the Jets the 13th overall pick. That's pretty high, and that's like more in the area. And then I think they wasted it on D. Milliner, but that's pretty. It might have gone on Sheldon Richardson, but that's pretty high. And so, like, I don't know. Like, for me, the return would have to be pretty good. At PW Chill, what positions do we need to draft? 2 question marks. So that means that this is a very curious question. And we love curious questions here on the mailbag. I would say that the Seahawks definitely need to draft offensive line, Defensive line, my priority all year has been pass rush. That's not going to change. They've got Frank Clark. I think they're going to definitely bring him back, whether it's franchise tag or a contract extension. They've got Rasheem Green as a guy to develop. But I don't have any real hopes for Quentin Jefferson. I don't really know that there's a lot coming out of Brandon Jackson. And then that's really their defensive ends, unless Jacob Martin moves to defensive end. So pass rush is the number one priority. And number two probably would be a better guard, better guys to protect against the players that are going to be coming in. The NFC West already has Aaron Donald. It already has Chandler Jones. It already has DeForest Buckner. They've got these great pass rushers there. Maybe the Rams bring back Sue. There's also Solomon Thomas. Is he going to get better for the 49ers? There's just, and then the 49ers and Cardinals draft in the top two. And this is, like I said, this is a draft that could have, is going to have these great pass rushers, Nick Bosa, Quinnen Williams, Josh Allen. It's just like all of this problem that you're going to have protecting Russell Wilson next year. So drafting a guard, if there's one there that's like, oh man, this guy is great, and which you can get at 21 if that's where they stayed, but they're not going to stay there. But if they did, it's like you can get a great guard in the 20s of the draft. So I think that's something for them to consider there too. And then, potentially more weapons, a wide receiver, for sure is going to be a consideration. I think, a safety has got to be a consideration. A cornerback could be a consideration. But my top two would be defensive end and maybe guard, tackle if you feel really strong about that tackle. Moving on. Got a few more questions here. At Eric J. Baird, you feel we will make at least one quote unquote big signing in free agency? Maybe big in terms of Ziggy Ansah in a guy of just like, oh, I know who that guy is, and he's been good before, and he was a top draft pick. We know that they like guys who have been high draft picks and then maybe didn't perform up to the level that was expected of them, like a DJ Fluker, a Luke Jokel. They've brought in a lot of guys from that 2013 draft in the top 15. So I think that they could make a name signing, but I don't think that they'll break the bank on anyone. They never really have, for the most part. They would trade for someone like Percy Harvin, Jimmy Graham, give Percy Harvin money. But it's been a long time for the most part since they've signed an outside free agent to big money and sort of hit that first wave. So I don't think that they will do that. Joe Miller at Spooky SPUUKY _ what do you think will be the next big analytics argument after run pass distribution settles at what it's going to settle at? Well, I think the run pass argument is dead and boring, and we can move on to something else. I pray. Just try something else. Think of anything else to talk about. Just try. It's got to be out there. Do you care about defense? Do you care about, just different ways to pass the ball successfully? It's boring and it's tired and there's nothing coming out of it. And it's just like, move on. I've did it myself for a long time, and it's just like, what else? There's got to be another way to live your life. So just move on and try something else. Use that smart analytics stuff to figure other stuff out as well, and stop focusing so much on the run pass. For me, I think that I know pretty confidently that passing is more valuable. I moved on. You figured it out for yourself. No one really wants their mind changed anyway. So you're not changing anything. You're just affirming to yourself. You're just talking to yourself, kind of. So it's something to talk about when it's worth talking about. When it's just like, oh, well, this particular game, I think like so-and-so and blah, 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 run pass, yada, yada, yada. For me, it's just still about not using a lot of capital money-wise or draft-wise on running backs, because a lot of them are just fungible, and a lot of the most valuable running backs just come later in the draft or late wave free agency. Just, I wouldn't, I think when someone signs Todd Gurley or David Johnson to these big contract extensions, it's worth talking about. Oh, well, that was a mistake. If that's what, you believe, and that's what I believe, but you can say like, oh, that's a mistake in this thing, and then talk about something else. If Saquon Barkley gets drafted second overall, you can like have a little rant on Twitter that day to be like, oh, this is crazy. What a bad choice. And I would agree with it, but then talk about something else. So the next big analytics argument, I don't know, maybe I'd be interested in, maybe the value of, I'm just thinking about punting now, I'm just like Michael Dixon and that kind of stuff. So I think, there is something to special teams for sure. And the value there. And we don't know anything really. I feel like there's like so little known about coverage, and there's so little known about some of these nuances, and that's where I think like there's something interesting there. And field goals.com, everyone check it out. But with these issues that the Seahawks have had with kicking, with the issues a lot of teams have with kicking, I think field goals and kickers and that kind of stuff, there's some interesting stuff to talk about there. It's obviously not as vital as what you do on offense or defense. And I think, the people saying that there's a variability in defense and that there's not, it's not something that's sustainable is interesting to talk about. I would also I don't know if it's an analytics argument too, but it's just like, why does a team, talking about why a team like the Baltimore Ravens can be number one in defense like back in 2000 and sort of have that same identity 18, 19 years later. It's interesting to see that's how identities go decades long and how teams keep those identities, and how it starts with, maybe ownership and the city and the way that the expectations are. So I think that's an interesting thing to think about. It's not really an analytics argument, but it's one thing that's even going on with the Seahawks. Like as Pete Carroll gets closer to his retirement, what will this team look like in 2040 or 2030? That's kind of an interesting thing to consider. Will it look sort of in a similar way? Russ Wilson might still be the quarterback in 2030, which is kind of nuts. But just try something else besides run pass distribution. Last question at AutoHawk2. Who is a bigger priority, Sweezy or Fluker, and which one will be more affordable? I think Sweezy will be more affordable. I don't think either one of them, if I was running the Seahawks, would be a priority for me. Don't care too much. I just think that they both need to be upgraded. I think the idea was nice. You got a couple of starting guards who cost $1.5 million each. I don't think that you now take those guards and be like, great, now let's give you $6 million each. I think you try and find the other guards who are $1.5 million each, or you try and get better guards. And that's what I would, pardon me, February. That's what I would focus on. Try and get better guards, and don't re-sign these guys to the money. You don't want that. So for me, I guess the better player would be, DJ Fluker, but I don't necessarily think either one should be brought back unless it was really, inexpensive. And I think, that's where I sort of stand on the guards. The Seahawks need to get better at tackle and both guard positions. They could potentially still make a move at center. Woo! We answered a lot of questions, and by we, I mean me. Went for a while. Thank you for sending them in, everybody out there. Thank you for listening to the show. Again, thank you to our sponsors, injurylegalcenter.net. Check them out. And also Foot Bottle. If you want to try and win the Foot Bottle, you can also check what they look like at footbottles.com. I'll have it in the post for this podcast, footbottles.com. Send me an email, sbnfieldgoals@gmail.com, and tell me your priority, whether it's a current Seahawks free agent, an outside free agent. And if you're a Patreon subscriber, I will be picking one of you to win that Foot Bottle and sent straight to your house, no cost. So thank you so much for that. If you like the show, you can support it $2 a month, patreon.com/fieldgoals. Follow Field Goals on Twitter @FieldGoals. Thank you to all of our Twitter questions. And I believe that wraps up all the X's and the O's, the dots and the I's. So thank you for listening. This has been Seaside Chats with Kenneth Arthur, the Mailbag edition. Come back next week for something that's not a Mailbag edition.